things, but I know just intellectually that this belongs tied to my class where that IB action was defined. So if I let go over files owner, notice that the events that I can wire this into is go. And here, honestly, Apple's just inconsistent. They call it an IB action in one place. Here they call it a sent event. It's the same exact thing. So I'm going to click go, and that linkage has now been made. Indeed, if I go back to my code, notice the little, whoops, notice in the H file, the little circle has been filled in. And I can confirm as much now if I go to the nib file and I click on, control click on this button. Notice that it turns out there's more than just the default blue line that can happen. Notice there's a whole bunch of events that a little itsy bitsy button like the go button can send. The one that's inferred to be the default when you just start clicking with control and dragging and creating a blue line is an event called touch up inside. That's like on key up. It's on touch up. So as soon as my finger comes up, this event is going to get fired. But clearly there's other ones related to dragging and other things. But that's the one that Xcode does by default. Suppose you didn't really know that or you wanted to change it or you just goof. Notice I can undo this. Oops, that was a mistake, but no worries. I can zoom out, and now notice I can go to touch up inside. The little circle becomes a plus, and if I click there, and notice I can drag to files owner, choose go again. So two different ways to now do this. And we'll give you a third if I now delete that, so the blue line is now gone. Now I can enter a different mode in Xcode, and this screen is a little small, so this won't quite do it justice. Let me hide the view over here. And notice, if you just click around, you can do no wrong. You can just hide things by clicking some somewhat obvious buttons. I'm going to go to this little butler icon in the middle, which is called the, what's he called? It's Assistant Editor. And if I click this, notice that I get a split screen. Unfortunately, my screen's somewhat small, so this is somewhat underwhelming. But if you have a nice monitor at home, this is compelling. Notice now that it's a butler icon because it's the assistant and it's trying to be helpful. When you click that icon, Xcode will typically open in another window the file that it statistically thinks you're likely to care about next. And in this case, it got it right. I'm in my H file. I want it to be in my nib file also, because now, notice these cute little circles finally have some applicability because I can see them on the screen at the same time. So if I click on Control here and drag down to here, whoops, sorry, it goes the other direction. If I click on the plus there and go to my button here, I can actually wire it to go in exactly the same way. So many, many different ways to do this. Let me go back to the simpler code window. I personally find it easier to just control click on the icon and then just start dragging and dropping. Let go, choose go. Everything's now wired. You can verify as much by clicking control. Looking that touch up inside is referencing files owner's go method. And conversely, if I go to files owner, click control, zoom in here, there's some stuff I didn't do. Apple did some of this, but notice that text field is linked up to the text field name, which is exactly what's in the UI. So again, three different ways to now wire this thing together. All right, so now, OK, really excited now. I've got everything wired up bidirectionally. I'm going to click run. It says stop nib1. That just means the simulator is already running. I'm going to ignore that and just tell it to restart the simulator with my new code. Everything's wired up. Very excited. Type in DAVID, go. Damn it, my first crash. So this is the debugging window down here. Anything that looks that unintelligible means you screwed up somewhere. So what did I do wrong? Yeah. I didn't implement the method. I declared to the world I am implementing a method called go, and then I never got around to implementing it. So it's like I've referenced an invalid pointer, effectively. So let me zoom out. Where do I, oh my god, what the heck? So there's your threads we promised earlier. I'm going to go back to the folder view, because I know what the problem is. Where do I solve this problem? Yeah, the .m file for my view controller. So first, let me go to my H file. Let me go ahead and copy the signature of this method just to save myself some keystrokes. Let me go to viewcontroller.m. And notice Xcode knew and warned me in yellow, incomplete implementation. So that's another advantage of using the H file and promising to implement something. You can now follow through on that. Let me go ahead and start implementing that here. Question? That is a good question. Let us see. let's click on the arrow, incomplete implementation. Let's see if we go up here, incomplete implementation, method definition. There we go. So short answer, yes. And I found that by clicking on the little yield sign here, the exclamation point, digging down through the hierarchy, and then Xcode reveals some more explicit information. Yes?
Why doesn't it throw a compilation error if you don't specify that?
Because that's a good question. It is not a, well, so we could turn on certain levels of warnings to tell the compiler, don't let me compile this. By default, it will assume that I know what I'm doing. Maybe I'm linking in the implementation of that method in one of those libraries that we saw earlier. So maybe buried deep inside one of these frameworks is an implementation, and I'm just making a commitment to the linker that those bits will appear eventually. Short answer is we could change that behavior if we wanted to. By default, it doesn't protect us from ourselves. Yes? Yes, these are all hex values, and presumably, I don't know for sure here, refer to memory addresses probably inside of this dynamic library, which is code that Apple wrote that's been compiled elsewhere, I'm guessing. RJ.
If you scrolled up in there, would there be any useful information at all?
There we go. So yes, it's a little hard to parse visually, but terminating app due to uncaught exception, NS invalid argument exception, not helpful, but this gets more helpful. Go, unrecognized selector sent to instance such and such. So this means exactly that. You passed a message to an object, and that message, that implementation was not actually there, even though you promised that it would be. All right. So easy fix. Let's go ahead and in my M file, start implementing this. And let's keep this super simple. I just want to sanity check that I'm doing something right today. So I'm going to call nslog of quote unquote here, just to prove to myself that this code's getting called. But this isn't quite right. So a couple things wrong here. I haven't done something right here. Oh, and I'm also in the wrong file. So, all right, stupid Xcode. So even though that's highlighted, I'm not actually there. Let me click on the M file and now put this where it belongs. But there's another error. Yeah, where do I put an @ sign? OK, in front of the first quote mark, but why? That looks like a string already. It's quoted. It's not an NS string. So an NS string is a special string object. It's a class construct that means there's more to this string than just a sequence of characters. It's not a char star from the world of C. It's an actual Objective-C object. So nslog, if you want more information, click on option, click the question mark, and you can read more about it. But again, it's like printf, but it prints to a standard place. And that standard place for now is going to be down here. This is also useful if you're programming the app onto the phone. You can actually connect the phone to your computer via USB cable, and you can actually see the NS logs of your application running on an actual device via the same mechanism. Generally, though, you should remove all of these things before you ship your product. Otherwise, anyone can see your debugging messages by plugging their phone into like iTunes and watching some of these messages, or the Xcode counterpart. OK, so what I'm promising here is that when the go method is called, it's just going to print to the log at the bottom of the screen here with a bunch of exclamation points. And that'll be progress, more than we've had thus far. So let's run this with the play button down here. OK. DAVID. Go. Woo! Finally. I'm programming for real. So it's not that interesting. The timestamp's changing, so it's happening again and again. But of course, I'm not actually getting the value that's in that text field. So we need to go one step further. So how can we go about getting that value? Well, let me try how best to do this. Let's try this. So hello, comma, how do I put a placeholder in for a string that I'm going to insert later? Yeah, so %s, %@, if it's going to be an NS string. So I would have figured out the hard way if I got it wrong, and it would give me a little red flag. So hello here, close quote, comma. Now I need a way of getting at my name that's been typed in by the human programmatically. So recall that we have in my .h file a property called text field. How do I get access to that property in code? What do I type? So yeah, but typically self.textfield. And notice Xcode knows about it, so it's going to autocomplete for me. And then how do I get at the value. Because text field's an object, I'm actually not sure. So I could read the documentation, but I've read it in advance. And if I start auto-completing here, it turns out that a UI text field object, if you read the manual, has a property associated with it called text, whose data type is, apparently, an NSString pointer. So it's a string. So I'm going to go ahead and just do self.textfield.text, close paren, semicolon, save, and all those errors went away. So this is a very poor man's approach to making an application that dynamically says, hello, David, or whoever I type in, albeit to the log down here. So let's go ahead and clear the log by clicking this little clear button. Let's rerun the program at top left. Here's the program. I'm going to go ahead and type in david, go. All right. So no one else besides me with a USB cable can see this, but at least I'm programmatically accessing the name. And if I change this to, let's say, Rob, notice that now we're seeing Rob's name on the screen as well. Question over here? All right, but we can do better, right? This is the horrible, horrible iOS application, or prob. All right, so let's see how we can do better. So let's borrow some of the same constructs we've been relying on thus far in the language and do something a little more interesting. I'm going to go ahead and first, let's say, declare an NSString pointer called s. And I'm looking at my cheat sheet here so that we produce now live will actually match the sample code that you can download and play with later so that we get this right. And I'm going to declare NSString. And it turns out you don't always have to do alloc and init. A lot of classes, NSString among them, have convenience methods that do the alloc and the init for you. And this is one such method. String with format is a message I can send to the NSString class. It's a class method, and I can very quickly get back a string formatted in a certain way. And I'm going to do hello, comma, %at, close quote, and then I'm going to dynamically plug in self.textfield.text, semicolon. So to recap, what's going on here? On the left-hand side of the equal sign, what is happening? Someone. Yeah. Creating a pointer, 64 bits of memory. It's going to be the address of what kind of object? NSString. Am I instantiating an object? So not yet. Not until the other side, the right-hand side, at which point I'm apparently calling a method called string with format that if I read the documentation will tell me that it's a class method that returns a pointer to an NSString object constructed per that format string. So what do I want to do with this? Well, Xcode, if I click on the exclamation point, it's an unused variable s. I've not done anything interesting. So let's do something a little more sexy. UI alert view. And for those of you with iOS devices, this will look familiar. Pointer, I'm going to call it an alert. And now this is going to look a little messy until I tidy it up. UI alert view, alloc. And now I'm going to init with, this is one hell of a method. All right, so trivia, what's this method called? Okay, init with title, message, delegate, cancel button title, other button titles. Okay, so it doesn't always read like a sentence, but that is the name of the method. So it's like a method really with multiple arguments. All right, so let's see. Init with title. What do I want the title of this thing to be? Well, let's say finally, close quote. What do I want the message to be? How about S? Because I took the time to construct S in advance. Message delegate. I don't want a delegate yet, so I'm actually going to change this to nil for now. We'll come back to that and what it's doing. Cancel button string. So cancel button string is essentially the dismiss button. So I'm going to go ahead and call this thanks. And other buttons title, I'm going to go ahead and say nil. And other buttons title means if you want more than just one button, this is how you give an array of buttons 2 and 3 and 4 and so forth. Semicolon, save. Okay, why is Xcode not happy with me now? I haven't used it yet. I've used S now, so I've solved one exclamation points issue. But if I click on this, it's going to tell me alert is not used because obviously I've not used it. Now this is a mess. It's hard to read. It turns out if you start hitting enter in your code, what Xcode will do is rather anally line things up with the semicolons, as is the convention stylistically in Objective-C. So the IDE will do that for you. And this is, though strange looking, it's a lot more readable than a line that wraps and wraps and wraps. So we'll leave it in this fashion. All right, now what do I want to do? I don't know. I don't remember, but no problem. I know I have a UI alert view object. I'm going to go ahead and click Option, get the question mark,